What we're going to go through over the next sort of 30 minutes, I'll be, first of all, giving a presentation around energy management, maximising revenues, minimising costs within the healthcare estates. We're going to try and keep it a little bit interactive, certainly be keen to get some participation and feedback from you folks. We've also got a few prizes to hand out. You'll all be pleased to know. So before we get started, what I'd just like to understand is just to get a little bit about your background. So if I've got 4 key areas, I'd just like you to raise your hand whether you're involved in any of these particular areas. So my first one is estates. Is there anybody involved with estates? Yep. Anybody senior management within the healthcare sector? Yeah. Private sector? No one from the private sector? Okay, very good. So the agenda for the next 30 minutes, what we'd like to think that you could take away from this session is potentially a slightly different perspective on energy management than may have been considered in the past. We are looking at this with sort of a slightly fresh approach to what has been traditionally looked at and seen as energy management. An understanding of how we can maximise energy savings with minimal capital cost. I think very relevant to today's economy. We're also going to show you how we can potentially generate return on investments of sub 12 months. So when we talk about energy management, usually the catch is that you've got to make a fairly substantial capital investment that will be returned to you over 2, 3, 5 years. The proposition that we've got to offer without fail to date has returned, given us a return on investment in less than 12 months. The next one, which is also usually gets people's attention, is that we'll also be telling you about a proposition that enables us to write you checks. So it's a mechanism whereby we are essentially a provider, what we call an aggregator for the national grid, and we're able to aggregate megawatts of capacity that the national grid is very interested in curtailing at key times of use. It's a lot about the capacity market in the energy sector, but it can be quite lucrative if you've got the ability of turning down capacity or potentially even using existing assets like standby generation sets. We're also part of the government procurement service, the framework agreement, so we can make this very easy to procure as well, and my colleague Dave will be telling you a little bit more about that, and then how we get started. So, first prize of the day. Does anybody know what a negawatt is? Never heard of it. That's not the answer, but has anybody else got a clue what a negawatt is? Nope. No prize for that one, I'm afraid, but good attempt. No? So there's the official definition of a negawatt. A negawatt is a theoretical unit of power representing an amount of energy measured in watts that is saved. So essentially, just if you look at the bottom sentence there, the cheapest watt of energy is the one that's never used. So it's a negative watt of energy. It's the one you don't use, and that's how the company name was formed. Our proposition, again, this is a slightly different approach to energy. If you take your traditional energy spend that you're going to spend this year, and let's say, for argument's sake, it was £1 million. If you go out to the traditional, what we call the big six, you know who they are, and you say, okay, I'm procuring my energy for 2014, how much is it going to cost me? And they'll come back and say, well, wholesale prices, cost of energy's increased, so it's going to be $1,050,000 for 2014. So our approach is that we want to be able to deliver that energy for a lower cost, and that's not because we're bigger than the big six, it's because we're going to do things slightly smarter. So what we're looking to do, and we're not quite there yet with this proposition, we've got 3 strands to what we offer. The first is energy efficiency, the second is what we call demand response, and the third that we'll have available at the end of this year, early next, is energy supply. And the idea is to be able to bring in a product and tariff on the supply that can flex what your building is actually doing from a control and from an efficiency and from a demand side management perspective. So as wholesale prices fluctuate, as the DNOs and the national grid incentivize you to do slightly different things, we can flex the building to take advantage of that. So that's where we're going with the proposition. So does anybody recognise this estate? 6,886 hectares of land. Shout out if you, we've got prizes, remember, don't forget the prizes. 28 million square metres of facility. An energy spend of 583 million in 2011-12. Very good. So there's one prize to be given out to the lady over there. I heard somebody else say that at the same time. Who was it? Did you? Are you sure? I'll give this lady one as well just because. 3.7 million tonnes of CO2. Now the NHS carbon reduction strategy calls for a 10% reduction by 2015 based on baseline figures of 2008. Currently, on the current statistics, we're 4.6 behind government targets to reduce those carbon emissions. So there is a need for the NHS to be more proactive in a wider energy strategy. I pulled this screenshot just from a recent piece of energy news. The NHS faces 2.3 billion energy cost shortfall. So what they're predicting, this was a journalist that was predicting a 2.3 billion shortfall by 2021. And that's just because of wholesale power and what's currently being projected for energy spend versus where energy prices are going. So it's a continuing issue that's unfortunately not going to go away. The problem is only going to get worse. So we've got to get smarter about how we resolve it. So the challenge, so we're under pressure to reduce cost, improve performance, be sustainable, all of those things, yet at the same time we've got no money to do it. So we've got no capital investment costs and we've got rising operational costs. So one solution that would require little capex, give us very quick and short payback periods, provide ongoing productivity improvements, and also take advantage of some of this thing that you may have heard of called the smart grid. Smart grid means different things to different people. We're going to be talking a little bit this afternoon about how you can participate in that and generate revenue from it as well. So where's the energy consumed in our buildings today? Well, this is not a hospital. This is a general commercial building. It's not a domestic property. This is a general commercial building. And as you can see from that, there is a significant amount of energy spend that goes into heating, ventilation, air conditioning, hot water, lighting, all of those services and facilities that we require in our hospitals every day of the week. Of that, if we actually pull that together, 62% Now this will vary dependent upon your facilities and how your what practices you deliver through your facilities. But generally, it's anywhere between 40 and 65% could be consumed by heating, ventilation, air conditioning services, and another 23% on lighting and 15% on other. Now, of that, the blue and the orange areas are areas that typically have control systems deployed to be able to control this energy spend. So there are ways that this can be brought somewhat more under control maybe than what it is today. So the next area, or the next question that I would like to pose to you is what causes buildings and facilities to be inefficient from an energy perspective? Can anybody give me a few ideas of what you have experienced to be causing inefficiencies in your workplace? Yes. Yeah, so the building, I'm going to make a note of these, and I'll shout at you. So first one, building infrastructure. Yeah.
People.
Sorry?
People themselves.
People, excellent. Any more?
Laziness of people not switching things off.
Laziness of people. People again, though.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give 2 marks to people.
The actual temperatures that you're running your environment at.
Excellent. Environmental conditions.
Some of our buildings don't have a system so you can modulate it depending on how it's being used.
So that one was the systems infrastructure to be able to control it effectively. Systems.
Someone monitoring it, I guess, as well. I know there's people, but you have to have somebody responsible for
Monitoring, excellent.
facilities and bills and
Have you covered insulation?
Insulation, put that up.
The type of fuel you use in a pipeline.
Fuel. Fuel stroke utilities.
Bad maintenance, poor maintenance practice.
Poor maintenance. Okay, we'll leave it at that. So you know all the problems. I think everybody's got a very good appreciation of some of the challenges that you currently face in managing these facilities. They're all excellent ideas. They're all very true. I'm just going to show you a slide here, and across the x-axis, that if you imagine that to be your building life cycle, okay? So whether you're operating in a building that's 2 years old or 30 years old, right? Let's just assume that the building's going to last 50 years or 100 years. It really doesn't matter, okay? And then down the y-axis, we have the building efficiency. Now, what that is showing us, and I've started this at 95%. Is anybody operating a new hospital? Yeah? So even in new hospitals, I think you'll still agree with me that it was never 100% at the beginning, because things didn't quite get commissioned properly and things didn't get finished as per the specification, and the list goes on. So even in new buildings, it's never quite 100%. The problem is that buildings are living assets. They change every day of the week. So what is currently a restaurant 5 years from now may be a ward. In 3 years after that, it might be a teaching area. So the buildings are changing their use all the time. Not only that, our contractors are changing all the time. Some are good and some are not so good. We get the detail. Everybody thinks, is anybody operating a building management system in their hospital? Does anybody know what a building management system is? So the building management system is the control system that looks after the heating and the air conditioning, comes back to a little PC, and that tells us when things are too hot, too cold, and should automatically take care of things. Those things get typically looked after by the facility management team, or maybe an outsourced contract to one of the bit larger FM providers. Now, what happens with those is that everybody thinks when they've got a building management system, life's good. You know, we've got good infrastructure, that's all fine. But when tweaks are made to those systems, set points are changed, time schedules are changed, they don't get changed back again. Your FM contractor's actually incentivized to ensure that he minimizes the hot and cold calls based on the key performance indicators that he's got within his contract, but it has no association with energy in his contract. So if he's running the building 24/7 for an area that's actually only operating from 8 till 5, he really doesn't care because he's not paying the energy bill. So there's all of these little things that tend to occur, which means that our buildings decommission themselves over a period of time. Heating and cooling at the same time is another classic one that takes place. So what we do, so let me take one step back. So it decommissions itself, we'll recognise that, and then you'll put practices in place to say, okay, let's get it back to where it needs to be, but we'll never quite get it back as far as it should have gone, and that might happen every 3 years or so. So what we do is that we'll come in and we'll try and get those systems back, working with the necessary contractors that you've got in as your incumbents and identifying what those issues are, but then we continually monitor what's going on in the building and continually make recommendations back around what changes need to take place. So that could be, you know, on an air handling unit, there's a heating and cooling valve is open at the same time between 2 and 3 in the morning. It could be that a particular piece of mechanical plant has failed. It could be a set point that's wrong. So we continually feed that back in order to make those changes and continually improve the efficiency of the building and ultimately the estate. Now, the opportunity for savings and CO2 reduction is that big blue area there. So as your building decommissions itself, that is pretty vast. And without fail, we've typically been able to save in the order of 10 or 15% of most people's energy spend in that first phase. So once you've done that, you're then starting to pay for other initiatives and potential other capital projects from the savings. So recommendations, we can improve the visibility of where energy is being consumed. You know, is it on the floors? Is it on the mechanical plant? Is it in a particular zone? Typically we do that through what we call sub-metering. We can optimize existing assets and systems. So we're not about replacing systems. We're not about putting big capital projects in place. What we are about is making sure that what you've already got in place is doing its job. And that's where the biggest opportunity lies. And we also make sure that these systems and assets are working in line with what your expected operational requirements are. So if you think that that particular building or ward should be operating between 8 in the morning till 5 in the evening, then let's make sure that that is the case and it's not running 24/7. Because if it's running 24/7, it's now using at least twice as much energy than it should be. No major capital project upgrades. So how we do that, we connect to existing meterings and sub-metering systems. If there's not enough sub-metering, we can deploy that. We connect to those building management systems that we talked about. So when we talk about a hospital that's well sub-metered, it might have 100 meters, might have 200 sub-meters in. When we talk about the building management system, every single temperature sensor, every valve, every pump, every chiller is a point on the system. And most hospitals have probably between 3 and 10,000 points that we can get access to. Bring that data back, analyze it, and make the recommendations from that data. You can bring in half-hourly data from your utility providers and also weather data. So all of this gets mashed together to be able to form the decision. We can create dashboards, events, alerts, greater visibility. Then we run them through these intelligent algorithms called fault diagnosis and detection, and the output of that then starts to enable us to continually optimize the facility and the systems. And we do that with our engineers, our energy analysts that operate away from your facilities and make the necessary recommendations back. That could be in a report, a scorecard, conference call, it could be an on-site meeting. We flex that based upon what the requirements are of every individual client. So, very quick one before I finish, and then I'm going to pass over to Dave. This is a case study. It's not on a hospital. It is a commercial office building in Canary Wharf in London. It's actually the Thomson Reuters building, the one as you're going up the escalators in Canary Wharf, one straight in front of you. You always see it on the news. It's got the ticker tape around it. That one we got involved in about October last year. They've got a £1.7 million energy spend, about 330,000 square feet of space. Significant energy spend and significant kilowatt hour consumption. Just as the quick highlights, we've managed to save them, or will have saved them, projected based on our savings to date of about £177,000 for the first 12-month period. Significant carbon reduction. It was a 3-month return on investment, 0 impact on occupant comfort. We're only impacting the HVAC right now, and phase 2 is, in fact, I've received the purchase order this morning. Phase 2 has been instigated out of the savings that have been generated from phase 1. So that's a real success story from taking this type of approach.
What was the percentage return on investment? What was the percentage return on investment?
The percentage of savings.
You said it was 1.7 million. What?
1.7 million of energy spend, and we've saved 177,000. So getting on for 10%. Yeah. So I'm going to hand over to David Peake. David's our sales director for the UK, and he's going to talk to you about demand response.
Thank you, Gary. Good afternoon. Right, this session now, I'm going to hopefully go through a few goals. The link to the productivity event, just to tie the two together, I'm going to talk about how we can make your assets more productive. So the assets that are already on the estate, how you can get more from them. Hopefully I'm going to show you how you can make some money, so we actually write you a check out rather than the other way around. And I'm also going to give you some context and show you how this helps the full UK sustainability play. Now, hopefully you'll learn something, and the one that's going to be a real push, hopefully we can have a bit of fun as well. Now, first of all, to give you some context, the UK has signed up to EU targets to reduce emissions by 80% by 2050 from the 1990 baseline. So a lot of the drivers in the industry at the moment are very much driven around climate change. It's slightly changed recently. The climate change bill lowered it to 60%. But when I go into some of these other areas, you'll see certain parties are still working from the original goals. The big one that impacts us in the short term is by 2020, 15% of our generation has to be from renewable sources. So this will give you some context where these schemes go. We've also got currently being closed 12 gigawatts worth of coal plants, so the ugly emitting sites. We've got 7.5 gigawatts worth of nuclear sites closing. You've probably seen in the press recently there is some uncertainty about new nuclear builds. So the consortium that we're putting some of those together now has to find another partner. And when we tie this together, you'll see that the program we're talking about is now actually recognised as best practice by GPS, the energy category team, so we'll cover how that crosses over as well. So, the challenge. If I walk to the graph, we'll see if you can still hear me. You still hear me at the back? This is the timeline over the next 15 years of how our energy mix will look. I mean, the first headlines, you will see that the overall demand will go down. So as the UK is deploying more energy efficient technology, we'll actually see a lower demand on the network. The big area here in the middle is the coal. I think the colours haven't come out so well, but that's going to start to pull away. And if you look at the top, you'll see that wind energy is going to be the area that looks to grow to meet these objectives around renewables. Now, whilst we're behind on most of our targets, we are actually on track to hit our objectives to be producing enough energy from renewables by 2020, which on paper does sound like good news. However, National Grid have the task on a daily basis to balance the system, to make sure there's enough generation capacity to keep the lights on. The trouble with wind energy, they can only assume 5% of the total capacity in their model. It might be too windy, not windy enough, it might be in the wrong place in the country. So when they put their model together to effectively meet demand, they only account for 5% of it. Now, nuclear is good, it's a straight flat base load. Coal has its problems, so if there is a peak event, the time it takes to actually reach the capacity to cover any shortfall, can be a sort of 4-hour lag. So we have another challenge. Yes, we're moving to renewables, but we still need to be able to maintain a consistent, balanced system. So what's happened, National Grid has come up with some new schemes, and not all of these schemes are National Grid, but I'll try and outline them. And what National Grid's looking to do is to find other ways to find emergency reserves. So, and it's not about just keeping the lights on. This is really a way of enabling renewable energy. So, a few programs that we'll talk about. STORE, which is the short-term operating reserve and probably the most widely known revenue-generating scheme. I'm going to talk about a strange subject called triad avoidance in a little while. But there are some other schemes which we're not going to go into today. I'm trying to keep it fairly top level, but we can certainly talk to you about that on our stand. So, what sort of assets are we looking for? You're going to find across your estate there'll be a raft of generators, DRUPS units, which are kind of combined UPS and generators. You will have CHP plant. Yes, they may be used predominantly for heat, but there's export capability there as well. What Gary talked about earlier on was how you can optimise a site. We can actually look at where else can we go once that site's optimised and see what we can use there to generate revenues. And I'll come back to that in a little while. But ultimately, all of these assets can be earning you cash. Now, I'll talk briefly around STORE. STORE is a pre-emergency service for National Grid. So when they believe there is going to be an excess demand, they will look to call assets online or for sites to drop their loads for a period of time. Typically, those events will be an hour to an hour and a half long. Generally, over a year for participants in this scheme, they're going to get called for about 50, 60 hours over the course of the year. Now, the way this works, National Grid isn't particularly interested in a 1 megawatt generator, 2 megawatt CHP. So we have a role called an aggregator where we combine lots of sites together in, if you like, a virtual power station. So when you put all of these sites together across the country, it starts to become an amount that would be of interest to National Grid. Now, the way this program works, there's generally a period in the morning when an event could occur, 7 o'clock in the morning till about 10 o'clock, and in the afternoon from 4 o'clock to about 7 o'clock. So the two peaks in the UK demand. The beauty of this program, if you participate, you get paid rent just for having your asset available. So there's a payment there for saying that generator, for having that available for this program, will pay you an amount each month. If you are then called to use that for a period of excess demand, you get paid a utilisation payment as well. So there's two financial components to the way the scheme works. Now, I've spent most of the last 4 months visiting sites across the estate, and you may be surprised to know that most sites are actually running their assets in testing mode for around about the amount of hours that you would run in this program. When a site's doing that, there's no revenue coming in. There may be a little bit of saving because you're not using all of the import off of National Grid. What we're talking about here is doing the same program running around about the same hours, but we're going to make a payment for it. Okay, quiz time. If it works. I know you're not all energy people in this room, but does anybody know what a triad is? Go on, you've got to have a guess. So I was expecting one of you to say it's some kind of organised Chinese multinational syndicate, but nope, that's not the right answer. Unfortunately, it's a lot drier, the real answer. Now, if you have access to the financial cost for running energy for the estate, you will know what a triad is. It's a significant charge. It's a way that National Grid recover some of their fees each year, and it's basically the 3 peak periods of demand during the winter season, there's a surcharge. Now, some of the hospital sites I've seen have had 10 to 15% of their total annual bill purely on these triad charges. And just to put that in context, I think most of the estate, if you used a GPS for your power contract, you'll be paying 8p per kilowatt for the imported electricity. During the triad, in London, you'd be paying over £31 per kilowatt. So this surcharge, even though it's only 3 units over the winter season, is significant. One of the hospitals I saw in London last week was not far away from £500,000 just on triads. So what we do here is a slightly different programme. Same technique, we would issue a call to a site to say, run your generators, drop your load, but we target the times when we believe it would be a triad. Thus, you'll be saving that particular penalty. And the way we do that, we have access to some commercial triad avoidance systems. Our own system ties into the weather, and we predict when we believe one of these 3 events will occur. Now, we can't do that exactly. The science is that we would probably pick out about 15 alerts when we believe this could be a triad event. We'll tell you to drop your load, and at the end of the year, if we've hit the 3 events, you'll avoid that large charge. You don't know these in advance. That's the technical side. At the end of the winter season, National Grid will look at those periods and retrospectively charge you. So you may not see the charge today until May to June on your electricity supply bill. So a combination of these 2 services, we can generate some revenue for the sites, but we can also make a significant saving on some of the surcharges. Now, to follow on from Gary's slides earlier on, we talked about how we can optimise a site, so how we can optimise a hospital by working with the building management system, working with metering. Now, if we say when we looked at that site, first of all, its normal operating conditions were a 9 or 10 out of 10, hopefully, by the time we've optimised the site, we've brought it down to a 5 or a 6. But there may still be some more room. So there'll be some non-critical assets, some additional air handling units that could be turned off for a period of time with absolutely no danger to the estate at all. And we would call that some kind of strategy that we would develop with the site. So during one of these events, a store call or a triad event, we would look to drop the load again for an additional level for a period of time. And obviously we understand the HTM and what we can look at and what we can't look at. But this is, again, additional revenue that you could generate from the programme. So, I know what you're all thinking. What does this actually mean to us? So I've got some examples now as to what this could potentially earn for a site where we ran a triad avoidance scheme and a store scheme. It does vary regionally. The charges are set by the old electricity distribution areas, so you'll get a premium in London and the South East as opposed to Scotland. But to give you an idea, now this is based on 1 megawatt worth of load drop or generator. Most hospitals, I mean, the average load's about 3 megawatts. We've been to hospitals that have got 11, 12 megawatts of capacity. So this is just to give you a kind of a ballpark number. But in northern Scotland, you're talking about 21,000 a year. The central belt, so Glasgow, Edinburgh, 27,000 a year. North East, North West, North Wales varies 30 to 36,000 a year. The Midlands, East and West, is around about 40,000 per year per megawatt. South Wales, 38. When we start to get into London and the South East, we're not getting far shy for 50,000. and southwest again, another area where there's premiums made. Now, a couple of sites we've looked at have been able to export as well. So as well as dropping the load, they've actually been able to put some excess back onto the grid, and you can generate a revenue for these triads. So just as you're penalised by using electricity in those periods, if you can supply it back the other way, you get paid that premium. So one of the hospitals in London, on 5 or 6 megawatts worth of assets, it was over £500,000 a year, the potential revenue for that site. So I'm just going to tie in now as to how this works with the government procurement service. The framework has just come out. This isn't supposed to be a sales pitch, so there are 4 providers. We happen to be one of those providers. But the energy category team in GPS has 5 goals. These services fulfil 3 of them. So it's in line with the UK energy policy and decarbonisation, it's maximising revenue from assets, and it's an integrated approach to demand management with monitoring and targeting. So if you look at all of the directives the energy category team are looking at, this particular service is widely accepted as best practice. Just to give you an idea, the framework's just come into force over the last few weeks. It's a 4-year framework ending in January 2017. Sites can either elect to contract with a provider directly, a direct award, alternatively run a mini-tender amongst the providers. But the good news is, of course, all of the bulk of the procurement exercise has already been done. The 4 providers shortlisted have been selected, so this isn't the longest process to actually get up and running. If you look on the Cabinet Office website, you'll see that the service is now listed and the list of the providers are on there. Over the next month, GPS is going to send some communications out, some e-signs and bits and pieces to get this out to you. Okay, what would happen with demand response? There is no cost to go and assess a site. So whichever the providers you would be looking to try, they will come and assess the site to see whether it's viable, what the potential returns would be. There may be a cost to upgrade the assets that are on the site today, and that's the purpose of the audit. If there is a cost to upgrade the assets, the providers will provide you with a business case to show you the potential returns and what day one cost would be. Now, typically newer sites, which are certainly in the last 4 or 5 years build, will be ready to go day one. There won't be any need to upgrading the assets on the sites at all. Certainly, business as usual won't be impacted. If there was a genuine power failure at the site, the priority is to keep the site live, not to be generating revenues from these programs. So in the event of a genuine power failure, running the site is priority number 1. There are some other benefits. By running these assets regularly at load in this program, it's actually de-risking the site. Typically, a site may test its assets with no load, run it for a couple of hours. It's not going to show you what's going to happen in a true power failure. This will give you more resilience. Obviously, some good news for the UK. We will help to reduce the CO2 emissions because National Grid won't be relying on that horrible coal and oil burning plants for emergencies anymore. So, process. Typically, an engineer would come out to do the site assessment. We would look to understand whether it was a site that we used the generators or whether we could drop load or a mix of both. We would sit down with the facilities teams, the estates teams, to develop a curtailment strategy. So the site was happy that business as usual would be maintained. The site, I'm sure there's a process to pass this up to the senior management in the trust, but then whether there was a mini tender or a direct award, we'd get to the contract signing stage. It's still not ready to go at that point. National Grid agrees strike prices for these services 3 times a year. So what we would look to do then is tender the potential availability of that site and get a price for the site. We then deploy technology at our cost, so the cost to call the assets online, the cost to drop the loads, we take that side of it and the metering. We then start running, we then start writing you a cheque. So once a month you'll get a cheque for the availability payments, and if there's utilisations you'll see those payments as well. Okay, and just to give you a bit of a flavour for what's likely to happen, if you look at my earlier chart that showed you the generation mix, with the generation that's being taken out of the model, we are going to have a problem over the next few years. Programs like demand response are helping, but it's not going to be enough. What is likely to happen is you'll see seasonal time of day tariffs on your electricity supply bills. So Gary's slide earlier on, which outlined the shortfall, you will pay a premium to use power in the morning, you'll pay a premium in the afternoon. That will drive the market to push the demand down. There's also, we talked about a negawatt at the start. It's widely accepted there will be a secondary negawatt market. So whereas you buy your energy at the moment on the wholesale market, there will be a secondary market for the ones you don't use. So you'll be able to bid the power that you didn't draw in a market to see what is the best available scheme. Mad, but that's the way the thing's actually looking to go. But really, sites which have got some kind of optimization technology there, the ability to draw on these loads will be equipped for the future. So you'll be able to not only generate these revenues from these programs, but be able to change your load to suit the pricing models of the future as well. So that kind of ends our presentation. We do have just enough time for some questions. I'll ask Gary to join me in case it's a energy efficiency question. Any questions out there?
Yeah, how confident are you that when you look at the idea of this megawatt idea of bidding this trading scheme, that presumably this is government-backed scheme legislation, how confident are you that it will continue enough of the foreseeable future to make it viable? Because government has a habit of just saying, we don't need to do this anymore. Next month it's going to stop.
Yeah, just to give a bit of context, the National Grid have signed up to objectives to what the generation mix will look like over the next, well, up to 2050. National Grid are still staying with the original model, so government has diluted it a little bit, but I guess the balancing player of the system is still going for the original targets. The programme in some forms has been running for 5 years now. So, and the government, certainly with the energy bill last year, sees this as a significant way forward to effectively balance the system.
The reason I'm asking the question is I'm actually one of the local people.
Okay.
And we were involved in the local the landfill allowance trading scheme, which I don't know if you're familiar with, which actually is trading for getting landfill feeding it into the grid.
Mhm.
And they just announced last year that they were cancelling it, ends this year.
Mhm.
And there's not sort of, the authority I'm involved with, it's not £300 million over a period of 25 years off the calculations of savings that the council's going to have. So that's the problem is the government isn't proud to do those sort of things.
Well, we can't predict that far ahead, but I guess the assurance I can give you for this scheme, it's a commercially run scheme. So the aggregators are commercial entities. National Grid has the shortfall. There will be a requirement. Where the government's come in is really to put some kind of framework for sites to use the GPS framework to take advantage. And there are some advantageous rates. But regardless of where UK energy policy goes, and who knows, it's certainly not going to go to the area where we're going to not need renewable energy. It's not going to go to an area where we've got excess capacity. So I think the commercial players in this space will keep this the scheme running regardless of the government's intervention. But so really today, I mean, whilst we're talking about the scheme, it is a National Grid scheme. It's schemes with the distribution businesses in your areas run by commercial entities like ourselves. Government's just taken hold of this to say, look, this is best practice. Let's put a framework together to enable our sites to take part.
There's another question, Christian.
What has been done before we go to jump from code to those fees that are going to be held by the organisation on behalf of the NHS?
I missed a part of that.
So I work with the NHS Trust, and unfortunately we're not receiving an awful lot of properties. They're going to Procter, which will hold the properties for the NHS.
Yeah.
Which means that we will be charged exorbitant costs for energy. What work is going to be done, you think?
Yeah, I mean, it is a challenge. And we've had some barriers here where I guess the owners of the assets are concerned about, the life cycle of the assets. The GPS framework only allows us to contract with an NHS entity or obviously a public sector entity. It can be arranged that the revenues can flow. We would have to hold multi-stakeholder meetings to understand who owns the asset, who runs the asset, and what the revenue share could be. But it can be achieved. But I'm not going to pretend for 1 minute it's going to be plain sailing. The only thing we do know for sure is the framework only applies to GPS sites. Any more for any more? No? Well, we have got, as you're here today, I mean, the GPS framework does allow us to, or does allow you to take access to the system. We can go and survey your sites for potential on the demand response side, so we can start to put business cases together for you at no cost. What we've agreed today is any attendees of the conference, as well as providing that survey, would also provide the energy efficiency survey. So the presentation Gary made earlier, we would do a dual visit. We would show you what the opportunity was to create revenue and also the opportunities to save energy at no cost to yourself. So if that is of something of interest, we have a stand. Come and find us, and we can certainly talk further.
I will say that the output of that audit is to generate a business case. It's not to give you an energy efficiency report. It's to give you a business case to determine whether this is viable for your particular facilities. So again, I'd like to thank everybody for attending, and enjoy the rest of the conference.